What happens when a movie becomes so dangerous that police storm the theater instead of critics? The world of exploitation cinema was built on shock and rebellion. Some films didn't just break rules, they shattered them so loudly that governments and moral crusaders fought back. Tonight, we dig into 15 outlawed visions that provoked outrage and sparked raids, arrests, and boycotts across the globe. Number 15. Blood Feast, 1963. When Blood Feast hit theaters, it wasn't just another drive-in thriller, it was a cultural grenade. Directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, this low-budget spectacle about a deranged caterer stunned America with its audacious tone and unfiltered brutality. No one had seen anything like it before. The film's plot followed a seemingly polite Miami caterer secretly murdering women to prepare a feast for an ancient goddess. The result was so graphic and absurd, it became a midnight sensation. Crowds fainted. Local papers demanded arrests. Some cities banned it outright, calling it moral pollution. Theater owners in small towns were warned by police to shut down showings or face legal action. Lewis faced fury, but also fame. Critics despised it, yet audiences lined up for curiosity's sake. He later said he had invented the gore film by accident, realizing shock could be a business model. Blood Feast became a cult legend, inspiring generations of underground filmmakers who believed cinema should scare authority itself. Its legacy endures as the moment exploitation cinema turned into cultural rebellion. What began as a joke ended as a revolution in red. Number 14. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few films have divided audiences like I Spit on Your Grave. It arrived with no studio backing, no major stars, and no safety net. Critics called it vile and unforgivable, yet underground fans hailed it as raw, unfiltered revenge cinema. The story centered on a young writer brutalized and left for dead, who hunts down her tormentors one by one. It was grim, furious, and emotionally exhausting. The film's stripped realism made it feel disturbingly plausible. In some towns, police literally seized prints from projectors mid-show. In Canada, it was banned for decades. In England, copies were destroyed under obscenity laws. Director Mir Zarchi insisted it was a statement on violence, not an endorsement, but the debate raged for years. Feminist groups protested theaters. Others defended it as an expression of trauma and survival. The controversy overshadowed everything else. Over time, its legend transformed. Once denounced as pure exploitation, it is now studied in film schools as a brutal metaphor for autonomy and retaliation. Every generation rediscovers it and questions the same thing. How far should art go to make us feel uncomfortable truth? Number 13. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Imagine a movie so realistic that its director was arrested for murder. That was Cannibal Holocaust. Ruggero Deodato's jungle nightmare pushed boundaries no one thought possible. It told of a documentary crew vanishing in the Amazon and the grisly footage that surfaced later. What began as found footage turned into a global moral panic. Italian authorities believed it was real. Deodato was hauled into court to prove his actors were alive. He summoned them one by one just to escape prison. The film was banned in over 50 countries. Projectionists were fined. Viewers fainted. Critics fled screenings in disgust. Behind the camera, it was chaos. The crew shot in extreme conditions, battling heat disease and ethical confusion. Even the composer refused to watch the final cut. Yet beneath the outrage lay a mirror to media itself, showing how civilization devours suffering for entertainment. Over time, Cannibal Holocaust became both condemned and celebrated. Its influence reached everything from Blair Witch Project to modern horror realism. It remains one of cinema's most controversial relics, proof that some visions can burn too brightly for comfort, yet refuse to die. Number 12. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Few films captured the chaos of the early 70s quite like The Last House on the Left. Directed by Wes Craven in his raw debut, it was marketed with one unforgettable tagline: "Just keep repeating to yourself it's only a movie." That line wasn't exaggeration. The film shocked audiences and provoked riots outside theaters. Its story followed two teenage girls abducted by sadistic criminals and the grim revenge that follows when the killers unknowingly seek shelter in one of the victims' homes. Craven shot it with handheld cameras and harsh lighting, giving it the feel of a crime documentary rather than fiction. That realism pushed boundaries and offended censors across continents. In the United Kingdom, authorities banned it outright, labeling it a corrupting influence. In the United States, screenings were raided and reels confiscated. Even projectionists were threatened with arrest. Critics, like Roger Ebert, condemned it, while midnight crowds lined up for weeks, curious to see what had caused so much outrage. Behind the scenes, Craven battled moral panic and distributors demanding cuts. Yet he refused to soften his vision, arguing the film was about cycles of violence, not cruelty. In time, it was reappraised as the birth of American grindhouse realism. Today, it stands as a brutal reminder of how exploitation cinema mirrored the era's anxiety about revenge justice and the breakdown of civility. A nightmare too real to ignore. Number 11. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS was never meant to exist in polite conversation. Produced cheaply and shot quickly, it blended historical setting with extreme sensationalism. The result was a shockwave. In some countries, police raided screenings while others tried to erase its existence entirely. The film depicted a sadistic camp commander conducting perverse experiments during the war era. It was loosely inspired by war crimes trials, but filtered through pure pulp fantasy. Critics called it grotesque trash, yet underground audiences turned it into a phenomenon. Banned in Germany and much of Europe, it became one of the most seized films of the decade. The production itself was wild. The filmmakers rented leftover sets from Hogan's Heroes and shot at night to avoid studio interference. Star Diane Thorne later said she was terrified during filming, but understood the bizarre power of the role. When authorities realized the film's content, it sparked moral uproar. Religious groups protested theaters. Canadian customs officials confiscated reels at borders, yet every attempt to suppress it only made people want to see it more. Decades later, it found an odd legacy. Film scholars re-evaluated it as camp excess and social commentary disguised as depravity. It remains a strange relic from an era where exploitation films could ignite genuine political fury. Number 10. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't just terrify audiences, it terrified governments. When it premiered, it felt like an unfiltered nightmare pulled from a fever dream. With handheld cameras, shaky sound, and almost no music, it looked too real to be fiction. Director Tobe Hooper told the story of a group of friends who stumble upon a rural family of cannibals led by the now iconic Leatherface. But what shocked censors wasn't just the premise, it was the tone. Every frame felt suffocatingly authentic. Viewers fainted. Journalists stormed out. In Britain, it was banned for over 20 years. Police warned theaters not to show it. Religious groups organized boycotts across the United States. In some small towns, owners who dared screen it were arrested for indecency. Yet behind the uproar, the film contained almost no visible gore. It was the sound design and psychological tension that made it unbearable. The cast and crew endured extreme heat and injuries filming on a shoestring budget in rural Texas. What emerged changed horror forever. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre turned raw discomfort into art. Critics who once condemned it later hailed it as one of the most important independent films of all time. Its legacy still lingers like a ghost, a reminder that fear doesn't need spectacle, it needs truth. And sometimes, that truth is too close for comfort. Number 9. The Wicker Man, 1973. When The Wicker Man premiered, it didn't just confuse audiences, it enraged them. British distributors didn't know what to make of Robin Hardy's strange pagan folk horror set on a remote Scottish island. Its collision of sex, sacrifice, and religion felt like heresy disguised as art. Christopher Lee called it the best role of his career, yet the studio panicked, chopping entire scenes and dumping the film on a double bill with a forgettable B-movie. But outside Britain, the backlash grew. Religious organizations condemned it as satanic propaganda. In the United States, several states banned screenings after church protests. In Catholic communities of Ireland and Spain, police shut down theaters, calling it an attack on faith. Even within the UK, reels went missing. Some rumors say they were buried beneath a motorway expansion. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. The production was underfunded, and cast members filmed in freezing conditions while singing hymns to the sun. Lee later admitted he worked for free, believing the story's power outweighed the paycheck. What terrified censors wasn't gore, It was ideology. The film portrayed Christianity as brittle, superstition as seductive, and civilization as a mask for barbarism. Its infamous ending, an infernal ritual performed in daylight, burned itself into cultural memory. Over time, the Wicker Man rose from mutilated obscurity to cult sainthood. Scholars hailed it as the birth of British folk horror, a masterpiece once treated as blasphemy. The film that governments tried to bury is now celebrated as one of the most haunting allegories of faith, sacrifice, and fear ever put to screen. Its flames still burn quietly, defiantly against the darkness of conformity. Number 8. Pink Flamingos, 1972. John Waters didn't just make a movie with pink flamingos, he detonated a cultural bomb. Shot in Baltimore on a shoestring budget, it was underground cinema's declaration of war on taste, decency, and convention. It became infamous for scenes that even avant-garde artists refused to discuss. Waters cast real misfits, not trained actors. His muse Divine led a bizarre competition for the title of filthiest person alive. What unfolded was chaos, filmed with sincerity. Pink Flamingos mocked the moral panic of the 70s by exaggerating it beyond imagination. Audiences either walked out or cheered in delirium. Critics declared it the end of civilization. Soon, police departments across America began raiding screenings. In Australia and Canada, the film was banned for decades. Some theaters were fined thousands for showing it. Church groups filed lawsuits. Yet in underground circles, it became gospel, proof that cinema could rebel louder than politics. Behind the scenes, the crew faced harassment. Film labs refused to process the footage. Distributors rejected it outright. Waters personally carried film reels from town to town, projecting it himself in midnight showings. His defiance made him a folk hero of counterculture. Years later, Pink Flamingos would be preserved by the Library of Congress as a culturally significant artifact. What began as provocation ended as proof that rebellion can become heritage. Its legacy is simple yet immortal. Some art exists not to comfort, but to disturb complacency itself. Number 7. Faces of Death, 1978. Faces of Death wasn't sold as entertainment. It was sold as forbidden knowledge. Advertised as a documentary exposing real-life death, it became one of the most controversial films ever made. For decades, people debated whether what they saw was authentic or fabricated. The mystery only fueled its notoriety. Directed by John Allen Schwartz, it mixed staged footage with real accident clips, blurring the line between journalism and exploitation. The result was horrifyingly effective. In Japan, it was banned immediately. In Britain, it joined the notorious list of video nasties. American cities staged raids on video stores, caught renting it to teenagers. Some viewers fainted during screenings. Others claimed lifelong trauma. Psychologists condemned it as socially corrosive. Yet curiosity was irresistible. Bootleg copies spread globally, turning it into underground currency. To own a copy meant defying authority. Behind the scenes, the production was surprisingly careful. Many shocking scenes were constructed using makeup prosthetics and camera trickery. But because no one officially confirmed what was fake, the legend thrived. Rumors circulated that real executions were filmed. Lawsuits emerged. Religious leaders demanded destruction of every copy. In time, Faces of Death became both symbol and cautionary tale. It revealed how humans are drawn to the forbidden, and how easily truth and fiction can merge when wrapped in horror. Modern found footage films owe their existence to its dark legacy. Even now, the title alone carries weight. Proof that fear isn't always in monsters, but in our hunger to stare directly into mortality itself. Number 6. The Devils, 1971. Few films have ever faced such furious condemnation as Ken Russell's The Devils. Based on real 17th century events, it told of mass hysteria and corruption within a French convent, where politics, faith, and desire collided. When it premiered, audiences were not prepared for the intensity. The film caused walkouts, riots, and even fainting fits in theaters across Europe. Starring Oliver Reed as the defiant priest Urbain Grandier and Vanessa Redgrave as a tormented nun, the movie painted religion not as salvation, but as spectacle. Russell filled every frame with feverish energy, nuns convulsing, priests scheming, and authorities weaponizing faith for control. Governments and church officials immediately declared war on it. The British Board of Film Classification demanded over 30 cuts before allowing release. In the United States, entire cities banned it. Warner Brothers panicked. The studio feared global backlash and tried to bury the movie. Some reels were literally locked away in vaults. For decades, certain scenes remained unseen, including the infamous sequence that critics said destroyed any chance of forgiveness. Behind the scenes, the tension was brutal. Actors struggled emotionally with the material. Reed himself admitted the production left him spiritually drained. Russell defended the film as truth, not blasphemy, saying it exposed the hypocrisy of power masquerading as piety. Today, The Devils is hailed as one of the most courageous works in cinema history. Its artistry, raw and defiant, still feels dangerous. What was once banned as heresy is now studied as a warning of how fear and fanaticism can twist righteousness into madness. Number 5. Caligula, 1979. Caligula was born from scandal. Funded by Penthouse publisher Bob Guccione, written by Gore Vidal, and directed by Tinto Brass, it began as a political epic about the corruption of absolute power. What it became was chaos on celluloid, a film so infamous it led to theater raids around the world. With Malcolm McDowell as the deranged Roman emperor, the film chronicled his descent into tyranny, betrayal, and debauchery. Lavish sets rivaled major Hollywood productions, yet the studio meddling turned it into a spectacle of excess. Guccione inserted additional scenes after shooting, which outraged both cast and crew. Director Brass disowned the final cut. Vidal demanded his name removed. When it premiered in 1979, police in several American cities attempted to shut it down for obscenity. Britain banned it entirely. Australia followed suit. Even Italy, the film's homeland, distanced itself. Critics called it moral poison. McDowell received death threats, yet audiences still lined up, drawn by morbid curiosity and whispered rumors of scenes no one had dared attempt before. Behind the uproar was a serious vision, an allegory for how power devours its rulers and corrupts everyone near it. The chaos behind the camera mirrored the madness on screen. Over decades, Caligula has been re-edited, restored, and re-examined. Scholars now see it as a tragic collision of art and exploitation, a masterwork trapped in controversy. Once rated and reviled, it endures as a monument to creative excess and the price of freedom in cinema. Number 4. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. When Martin Scorsese released The Last Temptation of Christ, the world erupted. For some, it was a profound meditation on faith and humanity. For others, it was an unforgivable act of blasphemy. The controversy spread faster than the film itself. Theaters were bombed. Religious protests turned violent. Governments debated banning it outright. The film presented Christ not as a distant icon, but as a man struggling between divinity and desire. Willem Dafoe's portrayal was raw and human, while Scorsese's direction made the story feel immediate and intimate. Yet that humanization enraged fundamentalist groups. In Paris, a Molotov cocktail was thrown into a cinema, injuring dozens. In the United States, protesters surrounded screenings, shouting prayers through megaphones. Universal Pictures nearly canceled release after receiving death threats. Several countries, including Chile and the Philippines, banned it for decades. Scorsese received bodyguards. Cast members were ostracized by religious communities. Critics were split. Some hailed it as sacred art, others damned it as sacrilege. Behind the scenes, the journey to make it was grueling. Scorsese spent years trying to get funding after multiple studios withdrew under pressure. He mortgaged his own reputation to bring it to life. In the end, his courage turned controversy into conversation. Today, The Last Temptation of Christ is regarded as one of the bravest spiritual explorations ever filmed. It forced believers and skeptics alike to face an uncomfortable truth that faith is not perfection, but struggle. And in that struggle lies humanity itself. Number 3. A Serbian Film, 2010. When A Serbian Film was unleashed, it felt less like a release and more like a detonation. Few movies in modern history have provoked such outrage. Screenings were raided, festivals were forced to cancel, and its director, Srđan Spasojević, was branded a national disgrace. But behind the horror was an allegory that many refused to see. The story followed a retired adult performer lured back into an underground production that becomes a nightmare of corruption, exploitation, and political symbolism. It wasn't meant to shock for shock's sake. Spasojevic claimed it was a metaphor for how his country's citizens had been manipulated by politics and violence for decades. Yet the imagery was so extreme that outrage drowned any interpretation. In Spain, organizers were arrested after a festival screening. Norway banned the film indefinitely. Britain refused certification without heavy cuts. In Serbia, the government launched investigations. The controversy became a global phenomenon as countries debated whether freedom of expression had limits. Behind the camera, the cast endured relentless psychological pressure. Actor Srđan Todorović later admitted he nearly walked away several times, but stayed believing the film's message needed to be heard. The set atmosphere was grim-heavy, with moral tension. Over time, some critics revisited it as political allegory disguised as horror. Others dismissed it as unforgivable. Yet, no matter how one interprets it, a Serbian film remains one of the most notorious artistic statements of the 21st century. It stands as a brutal reminder that art can wound, and that sometimes the loudest protest against oppression sounds like a scream. Number 2. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's final film Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, exists at the intersection of art and atrocity. Inspired by the writings of the Marquis de Sade, it relocated the story to fascist Italy, turning sadism into a metaphor for state control. What emerged was one of the most banned and debated films of all time. When it premiered, audiences fled in horror. Some fainted. Others shouted for police intervention. In several countries, projectionists refused to play it. Pasolini, who had always been a political provocateur, defended it as a study of how power dehumanizes both rulers and victims. But only weeks after finishing the film, he was murdered under mysterious circumstances. That tragedy deepened the movie's aura of doom. Censors across Europe declared it obscene. Italy seized prints from cinemas. Britain banned it for more than 2 decades. The United States allowed only limited underground screenings. Critics were polarized. Some saw genius, others depravity. Behind the scenes, production was exhausting and filled with fear. Pasolini's cast endured emotional strain while shooting scenes of degradation that blurred the line between acting and endurance. The director himself spoke of feeling cursed, as though art had become prophecy. Over the years, Salò evolved from forbidden relic to academic obsession. Today, it is viewed not as exploitation, but as a cry of despair against authoritarianism and moral decay. Pasolini's death sealed its legend, turning it into both warning and requiem. No other film embodies the idea that truth can be too terrible to bear. Number 1. Straw Dogs, 1971. Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs shattered the line between art and obscenity. Released in an era already trembling with social unrest, it ignited debates that raged for decades. Censors called it immoral. Critics called it genius. Audiences were torn between fascination and disgust. Starring Dustin Hoffman as a quiet mathematician pushed into violent retaliation, the film dissected masculinity, repression, and human savagery. Set in a small Cornish village, it built tension slowly until civility collapsed entirely. Peckinpah wanted to show how every man carries violence inside him, how under pressure morality disintegrates. When it premiered in Britain, the reaction was volcanic. The British Board of Film Classification demanded major cuts. Ireland banned it outright. Feminist groups protested nationwide. Peckinpah was accused of glorifying brutality. His defense was simple. He wasn't celebrating violence, he was confronting it. Still, the outrage was relentless. The production itself was as volatile as the story. Peckinpah's temper was infamous. Cast members clashed constantly. Hoffman struggled with the director's intense demands. Yet that turmoil gave the film its edge. Every shot felt like confrontation. Over the years, Straw Dogs was banned, then unbanned, recut, then restored. Modern critics finally recognized it as a landmark in psychological realism. Beneath the controversy lay something profound, a warning about civilization's fragile mask. It remains one of the few exploitation-era films that forced both sides of the moral debate to stare into the same mirror and see themselves reflected in the violence they condemned. These 15 films didn't just shock audiences, they tested the limits of freedom itself. Each one stands as a scar on cinema's history, a reminder that art has always been dangerous. Which of these banned nightmares do you think deserves a second chance? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more journeys through the forbidden corners of film history.